My prediction, Penn State's going to get a commitment from Jaylen Harvey on Monday, October 16th, but it's still going to go down to the wire because USC and Maryland aren't going to give up.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, that is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State Nittany Lions, including recruiting, because it is a Recruiting Friday, and we bring them back. The Locked On Podcast Network recruiting specialist, the analyst Brian Smith, also covers the Florida State Seminoles with Locked On Seminoles. Today's episode, since we are talking about recruiting, very fitting, is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Yes, when recruiting, LinkedIn Jobs is the best. And when it comes to talking about recruiting, Brian Smith is the best. Jaylen Harvey has a commitment date for just after the weekend here, Monday, October 16th, after the Penn State UMass game. Let me know in the comments where you think he's going. If you have any bold predictions, it's down to Penn State, Maryland, USC. We're going to discuss that today. Become an everydayer. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this episode. Help support the show. We appreciate all the everydayers. Join the party. Become an everydayer here at Locked On Nittany Lions. Brian, Jaylen Harvey, I think we've devoted almost at least a half a dozen episodes to, and maybe even more. And even if the episode wasn't devoted to him, I think we've had discussions about him as well. This has been an ongoing situation, but at some point, everything's got to cross the finish line here. Jaylen Harvey submits the commitment. It has the commitment date in the middle of October. There were, yes, he was coordinating with his school because he's going to announce this from his high school football field. So part of the reason this date was set was due to the fact of logistics and planning and the high school and the principal deciding a date. So that was all factored in. But the question everybody wants to know is, where will Jaylen Harvey commit? I asked you to do some research since we did announce the commitment, and I said, hey, Brian, see what you can find with your experts and put your ear to the ground. From what I heard from my sources is that Penn State is still in the lead. However, USC and Maryland are just very, very close. The USC Trojans feel good about this recruitment. Maryland feels good about this recruitment as well. So if everyone's kind of saying the same thing, it seems like it's still a three-way tie between these schools, even though all the projections still point to Penn State. So did you hear otherwise? What did you hear that I might not have from my sources?
I have not heard anything specific either, and I reached out.
Okay.
I'm not surprised because he's been all over the map with recruiting, and in today's world, most of these kids want to do their own thing on whatever date it is. In this case, Monday. I would pick Penn State, but I wouldn't put any cash down on it, not with the way his recruitment is gone.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. This has been a bizarre recruitment, even for the standards that we have set this year. And there's been some bizarre recruitments.
So Jaylen Harvey down to those three schools. So let's break down each landing spot here. And I talked about this in a previous segment on a recent show to include it. And Jaylen Harvey, Penn State seems to be the likely landing spot because for the past year, he's always been projected to the Nittany Lions and James Franklin. This is the place that he seems to want to be at. He wants to go and play for James Franklin. He has the best relationship with the Penn State coaching staff. But on the other hand, there's the local factor of it that Maryland is the hometown school. And the Terrapins, they can recruit him as much as they can because they're so close. Then USC now joins the Big Ten, but USC may feel really good about this recruitment, but you're still all the way on the West Coast. I don't see how they can win this one unless the NIL package is just too good to be true. I really don't.
USC has always had a very random and unique recruiting pool because it's La La Land, as I like to call it. It's LA. And if he wants to be in a big city, okay. but it is across the country. That's a 5-hour plane ride. You know,
Mhm.
I don't know why you'd want to do that. That's rough. And ironically, he might play a game at Maryland as part of USC if he did that and be in his home state again across the country, because the Big Ten is so weird now. But
Mhm.
that'd be about the only solace I could find in it. I thought if he didn't go to Penn State and Maryland would be the pick personally, just because it's,
That's what I thought. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it just from a rational adult's perspective, but we're talking about a 17-year-old, give or take. I don't know what really gets him going. So, and he's kept it pretty quiet here lately. I don't even know if he announced like, hey, I'm picking between these schools because of, and fill in the blank. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what credentials are to come up with this selection and how solid it is. Is he done? Is he going to take more visits? I have no idea.
And that is something I heard as well, because you just mentioned there's a possibility that he might take more visits. Harvey is, I don't know that this commitment is set in stone. Yes, it's a verbal commitment, but that doesn't mean that okay, he commits to Penn State, right? I'm just giving an example. It's not like USC is going to say like, "Well, we tried," right? Maryland, we tried. We made a good effort. We made a good push. This recruitment is going to go all the way down to the wire. It's going to go all the way down to the middle of December because these schools won't back off. And who knows that maybe maybe an SEC school, because Florida and Tennessee were in his original top 5. Maybe I don't know about those two schools necessarily, but what if an SEC school says, okay, we missed out on one of our primary targets. We missed out of one of our, just somebody who was ahead of them. They have big boards. Penn State has Jaylen Harvey on top of their big board. Maryland has Jaylen Harvey ahead of everybody. That is their top prime prospect. They want him the most. But for an SEC school, maybe they miss somebody that's an edge rusher, a defensive end, and then they say, okay, now we need to pivot to really round out our class of 2024. And then they contact Jaylen Harvey. And then what happens if that recruiting pitch is really good? I think the reason Florida and Tennessee fell out of his top 5 were because they fell out of communication. They just weren't as interested at the time.
I actually know about a couple of kids that are probably going to flip at different schools. That kind of stuff is very common. So you were smart to bring that up. It's about filling your needs. You know, it can happen to Penn State or anybody else, and I do not care how much effort you put into it, especially in today's NIL world. A school could have less NIL money than you, but decide to devote it to one position, and it's a kid that they want that's on your commitment list. So you always have to be ready for that. And I understand. But at the same time, you just don't know when or where. That would be really awkward. Like somebody having an off the record conversation with Franklin. That's probably not something he's going to talk about on the record, but those got to be awkward when you get that phone call. Hey man, I got to take this. They're going to pay me an extra $100,000. What's James going to say? You know what I mean?
Especially when Penn State doesn't do upfront NIL money.
That's what I mean. It's just like, there's nothing you can do with that. There are a couple of kids committed in the 24 and 25 class, just as an example that I know they're committed to schools that don't do it as much or at all with the upfront. And until they sign, I'll have a doubt in the back of my mind, no matter what they say publicly, because a lot of these kids don't come from much. So it can happen. You were smart to bring that up.
It'll be interesting. It's not over, even though the commitment might seem like it's over. It's essentially a placeholder, and Penn State, USC, and Maryland are still going to battle it out for the remainder of the recruiting cycle until the early sign. And maybe I would hope that he would sign for the early signing period, but who knows? There's the later signing period in February that Penn State picked up Chimney Ono. I'm not saying that Chimney Ono had the same recruiting path that Jaylen Harvey has, but I think of what Deuce Robinson from USC, who ended up extending his recruitment all the way through. So if that's the case, Jaylen Harvey, I think, will commit to Penn State on Monday, but it's not over until it is truly over, folks. Let's just keep that out there. Now we still have more to discuss in terms of recruiting. Penn State's playing Ohio State in almost a week's time. That is going to be potentially a top 5 showdown, depending on the way the top 25s look. Ohio State's firmly in there. Penn State, wherever you look, 6th, 5th, whatever. It's a top 5 showdown. The two of the best Big Ten schools. There's an impact from recruiting the way that game ends. But in our next segment, the Michigan State situation. Penn State, it's all fair in love and war here. We're going to talk about why in just a moment. Like I said, The king of recruiting was with us, Brian Smith. Also, the king of recruiting is LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It is easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job and the purple hiring frame to let people know that you are, in fact, hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills, just the right experiences, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and then hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs at #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And the Locked On Podcast Network every Friday amps up college football coverage with not only these recruiting episodes, but Locked On College Football Kickoff Live with the expert hosts across the Locked On Podcast Network, previewing the weekend slate of games, the headlines, all the things you need to know about college football for that given weekend. And it's Locked On College Football Kickoff Live across all the Locked On College YouTube channels, including Locked On Seminoles, Locked On Nittany Lions, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time today when you're watching this on a Friday, and every Friday. And then after it's live, you can follow it and listen to it back wherever you get your podcasts on all of the Locked On College channels. That is Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. You won't want to miss it. Brian, you've been a guest, right, on that show?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because the Seminoles are right. Penn State and Florida State could be doing a crossover for the college football playoff.
It's not out of the question. I mean, they both have some difficult games yet, but that is certainly in a doable spot.
I could see it being a situation of a 2 and a 3 seed, or maybe Georgia's still good, but I feel like there's a spot where they could drop a game, but their schedule is a little easier because the SEC East is not like the SEC West. But I would love to see a 2 and a 3 matchup between Florida State and Penn State. Wouldn't, I mean, of course, because the Nittany Lions are in the college football playoff. But I enjoy our conversations, Brian. Let's get back to recruiting, because when we were discussing topics and what we should really, there's so much we can unpack and discuss, but we got to be finite with our top 3 picks. And one of them is because, well, Penn State, like a lot of other Power 5 schools, like some of the best across the SEC, whatever the Big 12 is going to be, and then the Big 10, even though the Big 10's got 18 schools, they are going after, it is all fair in love and war. Michigan State, the firing of Mel Tucker, whether you agree or disagree with it, you still have to, details seem to still be emerging. I'm not here to comment on the actual situation with Coach Tucker himself, and I never will. But from the football season, like time, is going to march on, and schools are going to recruit your players because there is a lot of uncertainty right now with the Michigan State football program. You had their biggest NIL backer just cancel all of those NIL deals with players, and you're going to be left to wondering, okay, well, if I don't have any guarantees here, why would I come to Michigan State, especially when I don't know who the coach is going to be? So Nick Marsh is the first one that comes to mind, because Penn State was basically the 1A school all the way up until Michigan State had its final recruitment visit with him, and Mel Tucker was able to reconvince him to stay home. But now that opens everything up. Kansas, Colorado back in the fold. I got to imagine Penn State. Penn State's also going to be hosting another kid, and that's a safety who is currently committed. He's a 3-star out of the state of Pennsylvania, so this makes a lot of sense for the Nittany Lions, and that is Justin Denson Jr. Brian, just in general, before we address Denson Jr. and Marsh themselves and how close they could be to building a relationship with Penn State, the entire recruiting situation at Michigan State, are other schools going to benefit from all of this if the Spartans don't get this right?
Of course they are. Those kids got to go somewhere. And if they canceled all the NIL, that's pretty bad sign. I don't know the ins and outs of that program. I know one of the kids they've got committed. I'll talk about that in a second. But at the end of the day, they've got X number of kids committed. How many actually signed? Because not only they're going to be paying Tucker something, I'm sure they're trying to get out of paying him, and that's just going to be a legal disaster forever, because that'll be in the courts. Lord only knows for how long. And then they got to get somebody else to come up there who's, I mean, got total leverage, and they're going to want a bunch of money because it's a hard gig. That takes time. These recruits aren't going to build a relationship with that person overnight. Really, really awkward spot. So out of every 10 kids they have committed, I'd say they'd be lucky to get 4 of them. I mean, it's just, I mean, why if you were a parent, why would you send your kid there?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, I don't know this coach now, and you're going to be taking care of my child. That's awkward, man. That's awkward. So that's going to be a really hard sell.
Especially since they weren't the reason that you were committed to Michigan State in the first place. I think when James Franklin came in, did a good of enough job in his first year to be able to piece together a class and retain some Bill O'Brien commits as well in the transfer portal. I think the transfer portal would have been really active back when, if O'Brien had when O'Brien switched over to Franklin, right? It's just the way that college football is now. And then with NIL, and schools are unforgiving. That is the most important part. It's not a reflection of who was at Penn State, but you see now that, let's take a Peyton Thorne, for example. This was the starting quarterback at Michigan State. And then all of a sudden goes to Auburn, NIL, the flexibility of the transfer portal, that is all here. So this is basically, it's high school recruitment. It's a free for all because these kids are some of them are verbally committed. Andrew Dennis is another player, an offensive lineman that's committed to Michigan State that Penn State offered. So they're not done targeting offensive linemen, even though they do have a lot. They have a lot of offensive line commits. For Penn State, specifically any of those 3, do you feel good when you hear about Nick Marsh back to Penn State, potentially flipping a Dennis Jr. Or Denson Jr., and then flipping an Andrew Dennis? Would you maybe, is there in an order that you'd say they're all the more likely? I like the idea of a Denson Jr. because he's from the state of Pennsylvania.
I don't know how we can order them because I'm sure all these parents want to know who the head coach is first. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got to have like a cutoff date. And this is awkward, but this conversation's probably already taken place. Hey, if you guys don't have a head coach by X, we're done. Mm-hmm. Because you're not going to have enough time to build that relationship. I've heard Marsh is still, committed to Michigan State, which shocked me. I thought he'd be the first one to decommit because he's got so many offers.
Yeah.
I heard that
Colorado was one of the first phone calls that was rumored to be had.
Well, that's probably been going on forever, but you know what? I got to see it to believe it. Like, especially the top end guys, unfortunately for Michigan State, I don't think they'll keep any of them. I don't know how you want to rank that, but if Marsh sticks with Michigan State, I'd be shocked. About the only way I could see that, and this isn't going to happen, is wide receiver Courtney Hawkins is named head coach. That's not going to happen. So that's, they're not going to just take a position coach and name him the head man. So I wouldn't be surprised if their top 5 to 7 guys are all likely not to end up at Michigan State. I don't want to dump on anybody, but prove me wrong.
And remember this too, folks. Michigan State might lose a lot of its current prospects and current players, but whatever coach they bring in from the outside is going to bring all of their players with him too. So,
it's just going to be a big switch. And they're going to talk about active in the transfer portal. Holy moly. Yeah. They'll take kids from about anywhere. Absolutely.
So because Lance Leipold is linked to the job. And if Kansas were to lose him, then Kansas is going to lose a lot of its players and its commits. And then Nick Marsh is linked to the Jayhawks, and there's already that relationship. So some of it makes sense. That's all I'm saying. Brian, the last question that I want to ask you, and it's back to that, you know a kid that is committed to Michigan State personally, just to a better understanding of the situation to see how likely Penn State might land a flip or two, because ideally you want to get Nick Marsh and then maybe a Denson Jr., but there's also the possibility of an Andrew Dennis who seemed pretty eager about a Penn State offer recently. So those 3 players aside, just help us put into perspective what is going on with Sparty right now in terms of the recruiting.
I know Anthony Scooter Carey. He's a running back committed. He's from Tampa. I live in the greater Tampa area. Mm-hmm. And I asked him the other day, I was at their game, and he told me 3 schools, and Michigan State was one of them, that he'd like to get back to campus and whatnot. Yeah. I got the impression that the Spartan staff has been very active, to their credit. And a lot of them apparently are dug in and want to, be a part of that program, et cetera. They're fighting for a job. which I understand. But at the same time, I could tell, and I've known him for about 3 seasons. I've known him a long time. He's a mature kid. I could tell he's like, I don't know what's going to happen. Just like cloudy would be the picture above his head. And if a kid that's as mature as Anthony is like that, I can only imagine what some other kids are like. So it's truly a difficult process. And I kind of left it at that. I didn't dig into many questions because he's going through a pretty rough patch here. I mean, I can't imagine getting that phone call. Hey, your head coach is getting fired. That's not cool. So yeah, he seemed to be in flux. Yeah. And I'm quite sure that most of the other kids committed to the Spartans would fall in same spot.
It's going to be a fluid situation. Like you said, there's coaching prospects that would be the glue to hold a lot of this together, but because there's not that lag, there's not that delay anymore because of NIL, because of the transfer portal. Mel Tucker did it. So it's not like Michigan State isn't it when Michigan State pivoted coaches not too long ago. Mel Tucker comes over from Colorado. Look how quickly the Spartans were able to be an impact in that. And I don't like to say that because, I don't like the Michigan State, plays for the land grant trophy with Penn State. So I want to have my words carefully here. But if Mel Tucker could do it in that short of a time, be active in the transfer portal, who's to say a different coach couldn't do the same thing? That's my point at the end of the day.
I agree. Hopefully for Michigan State's sake, they get somebody in there that really wants to be there and has some time to rebuild that program.
And now let's pivot to the final segment here. Penn State-Ohio State, a little over a week away. We're about 7-8 days away here, depending on when you're watching this episode back. And there is going to be a massive recruiting impact because it's a top 5 showdown. This is the game that Brian and I have discussed where Penn State actually closes. How do you close the gap? How do the Nittany Lions close the gap? This is the game. You win the game. You don't lose by 3. You don't lose by 1. You don't have the lead and then give it away in the fourth quarter. It's about winning it. There's no sugarcoating it. We're going to discuss that in just a second. Plus, Drew Allar playing back in Ohio, his home state. But first, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Snap into action in this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $200. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when all you do is place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Right now, Penn State is a 43-point favorite against the UMass Minutemen with a total of 54. There's a little bit of a rumor that weather's going to be bad on Saturday. I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers change, but if you like one side, jump on the action now over at FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off college football and the NFL season. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for HappyValleyInsider.com. Penn State rivals, the discussion around Jaylen Harvey, that is up on Happy Valley Insider and Penn State Rivals. There's a free message board that you can use to discuss these topics. If you want to go back and forth with people, you can also subscribe to them and have a paid premium subscription. But all of that and so much more coverage is over at HappyValleyInsider.com. Brian, Penn State and Ohio State, you made this very clear that if Penn State is going to make any progress on getting to the tier of Ohio State, getting to the tier of Michigan, who has made the college football play, like Ohio State has too, but Michigan has beaten the Buckeyes the past 2 seasons. So if Penn State is going to be not behind, but on the same level playing field, it's winning this game. It's winning the Michigan game. You have to win at least one of the 2, but there are going to be, because Penn State goes into Ohio and they've frankly had some very good success. Caden Saunders, Drew Allar, Ethan Grunkmeyer, just to name a few. But they go back. Ohio State doesn't exactly have complete and total control over the state of Ohio, and it proves it. Penn State, there's a lot of interesting topics from this game in itself. Penn State has struggled beating Ohio State. They haven't beaten the Buckeyes since 2016. They were very close in 2017. We know that one. Very close in 2018. And then the rest of them haven't been exactly that close. The Buckeyes have controlled them, even though Penn State might have made it a 10-point game or so. It was always the Buckeyes to win. This is a chance where I see I do legitimately believe that Penn State wins this game. So from a recruiting standpoint, there's probably a lot of prospects, a good number of prospects on Saturday that are going to say, okay, I'm down to Penn State and Ohio State. They're in my top 5, but I'm realistically, in my mind, they're my top 2. The public might know I have a top 5. These are my top 2. Whoever wins this game, that's who I'm going to commit to.
I mean, it's not out of the question. Some of these kids are just looking for a reason to pick a school. Either one of them is, I mean, this recruiting battle has been going on for decades and will never end. There are border states. They recruit the same kids. They're on the same conference line. They're in the Big Ten East, blah, blah, all the above. Yeah. So why wouldn't they compete for the same players? They recruit against each other in D.C. and North New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all over the place. I think some kids are kind of curious to see if Penn State's reached that mark. And it'll be kids from outside the Midwest and the East too. Okay. Because they both recruit down here where I'm at in Florida.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Penn State could win more battles down here. If you just add 1 or 2 more kids to your recruiting class moving forward,
the game changer,
because you get to the playoff or beat Ohio State, whatever it is, fill in the blank, man, that's great. So you've got to get into that upper echelon consistently. And they've started to get there anyway, but obviously beating the Buckeyes will help quite a bit.
I like that you said that Penn State is really 1 or 2 players away from getting into the upper echelon, and winning a game like this does get those players. It gets the 1, it gets the 2nd, whoever that is, because there's so many prospects that you can recruit. But that is the impact of the Penn State-Ohio State game in terms of recruiting, is that there's a lot of head-to-head battles. Of course, they're in the Big Ten together, and they've gone back and they played good games. They haven't played the closest games, but even though they haven't gone in the Nittany Lions' favor, they've played good games that are must watch. And this one is certainly must watch, even though it's a big noon kickoff. Fox strikes. I really want one under the lights again. I think we're going to get that in 2024. I thought it was going to be USC, but since USC is an away game, that can't happen. Ohio State will be that whiteout game. Especially if this one does not go. I like the Nittany Lions in this one, but there's always that it's a slight lean, because there's still the Buckeyes are top 5 too. There's a chance that there's a significant chance they win. There's a better chance that Penn State wins, and I'm going to take that. In out of the 100 opportunities these two teams play each other in this given season, Penn State wins this one. A big storyline that maybe people aren't discussing enough, Brian, is the fact that Drew Allar is from Medina, Ohio, small town in Ohio. Sure. Ohio State Buckeyes essentially disrespected him. Penn State recruited him right away. Mike Yursich saw a lot of potential in Drew Allar, and then Allar becomes the starting quarterback at Penn State and is developing nicely. But the Buckeyes, I don't know what they were doing. Same thing with Ethan Grunkmeyer. They've just kind of ignored. They're ignoring quarterback talent in their own state. But Drew Allar to come to Penn State, it almost seems like a surprise, because I'm not saying that Ohio State would have ever flipped him, but a kid from a small town school in Ohio seems almost destined to end up in Columbus.
Yeah, if there would have been everything equal, they'd have been recruiting him at the same time. I'll take the Buckeyes on that one every time. They don't lose many in-state battles where they focus on a kid early. But like you said, they've still recruited elite quarterbacks anyway. I don't think they're shedding a tear over it. But, right now, Allar's better than what they have. So it's kind of funny. Yeah. But
and the kid's from Pennsylvania, and the kid that they're starting is from Pennsylvania, oddly enough.
Yeah, he's from Philadelphia. Yeah, he grew up 2 hours from Penn State. Yeah. It is what it is, man. Sometimes it just works out that way, and it's an odd twist. But you know what? This is another opportunity for Penn State to show why they're a great team. If Allar goes out there and plays good, that also shows their evaluation skills, because they were on him before a lot of other schools were.
Everybody.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting, because I saw Allar at the Elite 11 in high school. I knew he was a great player, but it's different when you get to see a guy from 10 feet away. But everybody else found out the hard way. So here he is now. He doesn't even have a pick yet, I don't think. He's played pretty well.
No turnovers from Mr. Allar, and hopefully that trend continues. in what could be a rainy UMass game, and then the Ohio State game, a homecoming, essentially two back-to-back homecomings, one at Penn State for the team, the school, and then a homecoming for the likes of Drew Allar against the Buckeyes, who are the hometown school. Brian, always appreciate it. It's a homecoming every time you join the show. Appreciate your insight, your analysis. You are the host of Locked On Seminoles, so I encourage everybody to go check out that show and become an everydayer over there as well if you want to know more about Florida recruiting, because Penn State's recruiting Florida as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, and there's a lot of discussions over on that channel, and Penn State could very well it's not the likeliest because there's so many schools competing for those top 4 spots, but there's definitely a more significant possibility that you and I could have a game preview, a Locked On crossover in the future. So get familiar with what Brian Smith talks about when it comes to the scouting the Florida State Seminoles. Brian, I always appreciate the time over there. Subscribe to this channel as well. And Brian, thanks for coming back and making the show a whole lot better.
Thank you very much. I look forward to coming back again soon.